So I've been thinking about having yap sessions on this channel for a while now, where I just kind of discuss things, rant about things, rant about Deep Rock Galactic things. With today's topic being build guides. And I kind of have a stance against such things, whether it's a video or just you go to carl.gg to look up a meta build. I'm just generally against that stuff. And I've never made a build guide video ever. And maybe you'll be able to understand why, thanks to this yap session. Or maybe you'll just hear me ramble about random things or the same things over and over again for 10 minutes straight, or however long this video will be. Because this video is entirely unscripted. I'll just edit the voiceover to take out bad takes where I just kind of repeat myself or I misspeak and slur up some words really badly. But anyway, let's get to it. Now, I know that there's people out there who do experiment with their builds. It's probably more than I realize. I'm mostly going off of how many views build guide videos just generally get. Those are the most popular types of videos you can make for Deep Rock Galactic. So it makes me think that a lot of players don't really experiment enough or at all. And they just kind of go for the meta build and just fuck around with that, I guess. But the thing is, Deep Rock Galactic was designed in a way where as long as you can shoot a bug in the head, you will be fine. There's very few builds that make you unreasonably weak, and there's very few builds that make you unreasonably strong. And I think half of the fun of Deep Rock Galactic in general is experimenting with your loadouts, finding what works for you and all that. It was designed in a way where you would gradually get to experiment more and more with your weapons. You literally start out with no overclocks and with only a single tier of the modifications. And as you progress through the game, and as you unlock stuff and are able to upgrade your weapons more and more, you'll eventually unlock the entire modification system, where Tier 5 usually has the more interesting upgrades. And I think this was purposefully designed in a way to ease in players into messing around with their guns. At first you get some very simplistic stats, and then Tier 5, not always, but usually has some interesting things to it. And then, once you finally promote, you'll start getting the big stuff, which is overclocks, which makes you rethink your modifications depending on each overclock that you have selected, which makes having loadouts a lot more sense. And I don't know why we can't just make as many loadouts as we want. I don't know where we're locked to just 6. I'm sure there's a mod out there that lets you have infinite loadouts. Regardless, it's a mini rant. But anyway, that's besides the point. Deep Rock Galactic was designed to encourage you to experiment. So when I see a build guide or people telling you to do the meta build and all that stuff, it doesn't sit well with me. Especially when so much effort was put into the game to let the players discover what works for them. I think you should absolutely go for whatever you think is going to be fun and you think is going to be the most effective. And it's not too late to do that, even if all you've been doing so far is just checking out meta builds and barely experimenting outside of the meta builds. Just lower the hazard level by 1 and go with some whatever freaky abomination you can make. Maybe you'll be surprised how fun it is. Or if you're a new player and you're really worried about being very effective, well, we have like 5 hazard levels and a customizable hazard 5 level. I think you should ease yourself into the game, instead of trying to be as effective as possible immediately. Notice how the developers themselves are very hesitant to reveal like what setups they use for their weapons. Sure, they don't want to show that they prefer certain setups over others to make people think, oh, you didn't bounce that because you like that, don't you? That's probably a reason to it, but another reason is to encourage you to find what works for you. While the developers will never tell people not to make build guides, they would rather you find what works for you. Even if it's some very shitty overclock that you find just super fun to mess around with, maybe you'll surprise yourself and maybe you'll surprise everyone else at how good it can be if it's used right. Just because the stats are a little shitty doesn't mean that it's not going to be as effective in game. Also, that's another thing, how obsessive some people are over the stats in this game. I really don't understand why you should care about the little minutia of how this is a little better than that, or analyzing how this weapon works. I generally don't understand any of that. With that said, I am encouraging experimentation, and everybody experiments in different ways. So if that's something you really enjoy doing, then more power to you. That's it. That's all I wanted to say about that. Now I want to bring up an exception to my don't look up build guides rule. There's definitely a few exceptions to it. The biggest exception is when you've already experimented with the weapon plenty, and you just don't understand what's so good about it. You just can't find anything that works. That is the best time to look up a build for a weapon, or a meta build for it. Just know, even if the meta build does not suit your needs, just know that it's completely fine for you not to use a gun. You don't have to like every single weapon in the game. God knows I don't like every single weapon in DRG. And if DRG keeps tossing overclocks to weapons that you don't like, or keeps trying to get you to unlock paint jobs through the weapon maintenance system, just give it the good old middle finger. The maintenance system is like, hey, there's skins to unlock for this gun. Well, I never used the gun anyway, why should I unlock extra skins for it? The other exception to this rule, in my opinion, is when you just have zero hopes in the weapon in the first place. Like in my case, the BURT or burst fire pistol, I used to hate that weapon a lot because I generally am completely against burst fire guns in any video game. I just generally hate those. I'd rather use a little shitty pistol than a burst fire like SMG or whatever the hell. But because of this like arbitrary stance I have against burst fire weapons, I saw zero hope in burst fire pistol. The first few times I used it, I thought it was dog shit, and I directly went back to the revolver. So one day I decided to just look up whatever meta build it has, and use the meta build, and I was like, huh, okay, this weapon isn't terrible, but the only way you can make it actually work is if you try to emulate the revolver with this gun, the Bulldog. That's kind of how I feel about that gun. Regardless, if you like it, absolutely more fucking power to you. Like I said, go experiment. Maybe there's a weapon you hate right now, but it's secretly your favorite gun because you have not figured it out properly yet. You don't have to use the mini nuke for the PGO. Maybe there's something more fun for it. I don't know. Just tossing out a few ideas that I have for you to go into. Of course, there's always a good chance I'm entirely wrong and most of you already experiment and most of you really do look up guides for the two exceptions I just said. I don't know if this yap session was at all worth hearing to any of you. I hope it was at least entertaining somewhat. And I'm willing to continue this discussion in the comments. I don't know, suggest topics. If you so insist, you can even ask what weapon builds I run. But if you really need to know what builds I run this mod these days that shows what setup I have for each weapon at the bottom right. But yeah, anyway, toss some topics at me. I have some topics I want to get to myself, like how awful the progression is in this game. There's an entire rant I can go on about that. And yeah, hopefully I'm not gonna get downvoted to oblivion, or whatever the fuck. I want to quickly toss in something before the video ends. It might sound like I'm entirely against people sharing their builds and all that stuff. It's not the case at all. You can absolutely discuss weapon builds between yourselves, like what overclocks to try out, what setups to try out, that's absolutely fine. What I have a problem with is when people are trying to establish some sort of a meta. People are trying to tell you that you have to use this or you're a dumbass. That kind of stuff just annoys me. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in those types of arguments, I feel like, to the point where the argument will just devolve in some toxic bullshit, where people will just keep screaming at each other that this build sucks, you should do this. No, this sucks, you should do that. I've experienced a few too many of these like brick wall arguments where nobody's gonna admit to anything, that I don't like arguing about weapon builds whatsoever. So when I say you shouldn't do build guides, I really mean that you should avoid like the meta shit or what somebody's telling you to use. I think the discovery process is a lot more interesting and makes it a lot better. And you might find something that nobody else has found yet. Or maybe vice versa, you'll accidentally end up using the meta build. You know, that might be even more satisfying that you naturally kind of got to the overall what's considered as the meta of the game, I guess. I don't know. But that's it. Like I said earlier, I'm willing to continue the discussion in the comments. You can discuss between yourselves. Hell, toss out whatever like obscure like setup you have for your weapons or whatever the fuck. I think that would be neat. Or you can just suggest some topics for me to yap about next. I do have one in mind that I mentioned earlier, but now for real, I'm gonna go.